One of the things you will hear very often is people talking about how podcasting is saturated. If you don't have a lot of money, you can't win. Celebrities are taking over the game. Today, we're going to talk about a couple ways that you can actually win that a lot of bigger shows kind of can't do in a way. Podcast Growth Nation, today, for episode number 191, the 2 Ps that make you different. I know now is a strange, interesting, unique time in the podcasting landscape because it's very easy for a celebrity to start a podcast and just immediately get pushed to the top of the charts. I think it's just a different game for them. They are already famous, they already have money, and they have access to people who are famous and have money. And that's just kind of an unfair advantage, for lack of better phrasing. And like YouTube's kind of the same thing. Right? If you're a multi-millionaire, you can literally pay somebody to follow you around every day, video you, do all the editing, do the thumbnails, and just run the YouTube channel. Most of us are not going to end up at that place, right? But what they might have in resources, what they might have in abundance, they probably aren't willing to do the 2 things that we're going to talk about today. And this is far more, I think, scalable anyway, okay? So 2 stories before we get going here, real quick. I've mentioned this many times before, but I think this is probably one of the best examples. So we had an interview with a big guest. His name's Evan Carmichael. And this was probably 2019. And he said, I'll give you guys 20 minutes. I'm on tour. I'm doing a bunch of podcasts. Everybody's getting 20 minutes. So we did 19 minutes. I started to wrap up. Evan, make sure you plug your book that you're doing your book tour for. I want to make sure you get to your next interview on time. And he said, no, keep going. You guys are doing great. I want to give you more time. All right. So that is one of the things that it was a result of what we're going to talk about today. And then I was looking at my Podmatch yesterday. And on Podmatch, I have 330 5-star reviews as a guest, right? Being a guest on people's podcasts. And that's also a result of what we're going to talk about today. So the 2 Ps are simple. One is prep, and the other one is personality. Prep. On both ends, I want this to be on both ends, not just a host, but also guesting on podcasts. Prep. I'm telling you, as a guy who has been on 1,100 podcasts, as a guest, I have seen 1,100 different interview styles. I have seen 1,100 different tech setups. I've seen 1,100 different competencies. I've seen 1,100 different prep styles. And I'm telling you, the shows that stand out the most for me are the ones that do more prep. Oh, I was looking at your social media and I saw this post. I'd love to go deeper on it. You know how rare that is? That very rarely happens. Very, very, very rarely happens. And again, I don't mean this, I say this often, and I don't mean it in a super negative way, but if you mispronounce my name, you're already below the waterline. I mean, that is just a necessity at this point. Now, if this was my first ever interview and I didn't have any content and you couldn't find my name, that's different, right? But as a host, you got to get that right. As a guest, you also have to get that right. So the same amount of prep that you do for a guest interview, you should probably do as a guest. And eventually you can do it faster and faster and faster. And I was saying this to the Next Level Podcast Accelerator group last night. Every single podcast I've ever been on, all of them, every single one, I always try to find a social media page, I try to find a website, and I usually listen to like 3 minutes of 3 different episodes. I want to know the host's name. I want to know what they look like, if I can, to help build familiarity before I even meet them. And I'm always studying who do I think their audience is based on the name of their show, their topics. I look at their titles. I look at their intro. I'm always trying to figure out who I'm talking to. And if you get to that level, and then you can continue pushing, and eventually you get to the point where if you listen to 3 minutes of 3 different episodes, you might hear something that you can bring up in conversation with that host. Hey, I really enjoyed that episode where you talked about this thing. I feel like not enough people are talking about that. It's got to be real and authentic. You can't just make shit up, right? I'm not saying to do that. But I've had a lot of really great conversations in preamble before recording based on the fact that I just did prep. And a lot of guests aren't doing that. We have fallen into, to a degree, not 100%, but we have fallen into quantity over quality. Everybody's been told having guests on is a great way to grow your show. Cool, I'm going to have a bunch of guests on. Everybody has been told being a guest on other podcasts is a great way to grow your brand and make money. Cool, I'm going to hammer that. We're forgetting about the quality. The quantity sweet spot, that's a different conversation. But a lot of people aren't prepping. They're just showing up and going through the motions and saying, all right, check, check, check. That will differentiate you. So many of the opportunities we've had with the big guests that we had on the show were just based on the fact that we did more prep than most people would. I'm serious. Were we better interviewers? I don't know. Like naturally, I don't know. I think we were very curious and we did a lot of research. I think that's the big thing. I'll speak for myself. I did a lot of research. Alan didn't like to do research. He just wanted to go where the conversation was, but I was the host, right? So as the host, it's my job to make sure the conversation goes in a constructive way. It's my job as the host. But I do prep on the guest end too. And I know a lot of people that aren't doing that. A lot of people aren't reviewing the show. A lot of people aren't checking out the social media. A lot of people don't know who the audience is. It's my job as a guest to know the audience before I come on your podcast as a guest. It's my job. It just is. Just like if you're giving a speech, you better know whether it's a peewee football team or a professional football team. That's on you to figure that out as a guest, right? Now, as a host, sure, you can send an email telling people, but I still want to make sure. And I want to see the way you're titling your episodes. I want to see the way the episodes are edited. I want to see the intro. I want to see whether or not you interrupt people when they're talking, not from a negative place, but that will change the way I tell my stories and answer questions. That's a lot of prep. That's the level of commitment I think we all need to move towards. Because again, anybody can buy a microphone. Anybody can buy some level of camera, or you have one on your laptop. You can sign up for some service and then you can start doing this. You can host people and you can be on shows. Prep is where you are different. That is a great differentiator that I don't think enough people are really, really focused on. Okay? So that's one. The second one is personality. This one is hard. I don't even know if I could teach it. I don't know how to teach it. I think what it is you can't take yourself too seriously. And at the end of the day, this is supposed to be fun. This is supposed to be fun to a degree, right? If you have a very serious show, obviously it's not going to be laughs and giggles the whole time. But I don't know. Don't you love having a conversation with somebody who has a very positive, memorable personality? Now, I'm not saying fake it. I'm not saying you have to, jump around and sing. I'm not saying that. But people like personality. I said this to my wife the other day. I said, golf is one of the most interesting things in the world because if you watch the majority of YouTube channels that are connected to golf, many of the people are not that good, but they have great personalities. So you're not watching for skill, you're watching for personality. You're watching because you like the person. You like golf and you like the person. It's weird. It's a weird time for that where your personality can be enough to get you ahead of other people. And think about it this way. Let's say, I'll use golf as an example just because I'm on that train right now. Same skill level. Person A, one of the best in the world. Person B, one of the best in the world. Person A has zero personality. Person B has a shining personality. Who are you going to follow? Person B. Maybe person B was more naturally gifted with a positive, shining, attractive personality, sure, but it's something you can work on for sure. And that's a piece of the reps. That's a big piece of the reps. And I also think that's a big piece of guesting. Because when you're guesting on shows, you don't know what's going to get asked. You don't know where the story is going to go. I think it trains you to think on your feet more. Where hosting doesn't necessarily, because you have more guardrails. And you get to edit it. You don't get to edit guest ones. As a guest, the host does what they want. Now you can ask, but I've never asked a host to edit anything I've said ever. I like that. I think it's a good test. Just like on stage when I'm speaking, you get one shot, you can't edit it. You don't get to edit it live. So I think that's a real big piece of guesting that maybe is not looked at enough. You can really practice your personality. I think social media stories are great for that. Like behind the scenes type stuff is a really good opportunity to show your personality. I just think I did a post a story the other day. My wife and I just moved into our new home and we're split right now. Some of our stuff's still at the old place, some of the stuff's at the new place. And I used a cheese grater to make my ground beef or my ground turkey, whatever I was having, because we didn't have any spatulas here. And that's kind of my personality. It's like, it is what it is. It kind of sucks. It's weird a little bit, but that's the tool we have, so that's the tool we're going to use. I think that stories are a great way to practice leaning into your personality because it goes away after 24 hours. So even if you feel a little goofy about it or you feel like, oh man, that wasn't the best, it's going to be gone in 24 hours and nobody's going to remember it. There's a lot of stories. And 24 hours goes by pretty quick. So I can't imagine most people are going to remember your stories. So I think that's helpful. And I do think the more you do this, the more comfortable you get with figuring out what your on-air personality is. And then eventually it'll feel weird and you'll say, okay, that doesn't feel aligned. How do I want to show up? But I think the more you do this and the more you try to lean into authenticity, look, if you're a geek and you love picking people's brains and asking weird questions, do more of that. Do more of that. If you're super philosophical and you love talking about the universe and weird shit, do more of that. If you like asking strange questions that nobody else asks, do that. All of that stuff. I think that's a really good way to work on your personality. I do. And then if we were going to add a third one, I think it would probably be perspective. So prep is before, personality is during, right? You're always practicing it, but it's essentially during. And then perspective, I'm trying to think of another word that begins with P, but let's just say perspective. Perspective is looking at the data. Again, a lot of people aren't doing this. A lot of people aren't looking at the click-through rate of their videos on YouTube. A lot of people aren't looking at consumption on audio, consumption on video, retention drop-offs. A lot of people aren't looking at that. That makes you different for sure. Because one of the reasons big channels are big channels is because usually there's somebody that gets paid to do that. It doesn't have to be the host because the host is the talent, quote unquote. They just show up and do the thing. But that's the beauty of, if I gave you, let's say I gave you $100,000 a year as a budget for your podcast, for your YouTube channel, whatever it is you're doing. And you had to spend it all. You can't keep it. You have to spend all that money because it's for your podcast. It's not for you. You could you could spend $8,000 a month on team. So you could hire somebody that's a YouTube thumbnail expert. And then that would solve, quote unquote, that problem. But most of us are not at that place. And that's a long, long, long-term place to be. So you have to have the perspective. And the perspective comes from measuring data. So the prep is, I want to make sure I'm ready. I'm doing the work before the cameras come on. Personality is I show up and I make sure I add value and I am funny or whatever my personality is. And then perspective is I have to look at what worked and look at what didn't. And then that becomes the habit. All of those become the habits. If you're doing one episode a week, maybe you're prepping on one day. Personality, you're practicing every time you have a camera in your face or you have a microphone in your face. And then maybe your perspective, you're doing once a week. So every week, you're doing prep, personality, perspective, every single week. That's how you level it up. And then when you do that enough times, you can get really, really, really good at that. I think the hard thing about this is 52 episodes just isn't that many reps. If you think about it. 52 episodes, let's say it's 52 hours. I mean, that's a week of work with overtime. I mean, think about that. I work 60 hours a week. 52 episodes is 52 hours. Over a year. there's a conversation about depth. How long? I know a lot of people that say like, yeah, I started my podcast in 2017. It's like, well, you have 100 episodes. So yeah, you might have been doing it for 9 years, but you've only done 10 episodes each year. Like that's not enough depth, right? It's not, yeah, I've had my license for 10 years, but I've only driven 15 times. Okay, that doesn't matter. It's not the same, right? It's not the same. So there's a conversation to be had about that as well, where I don't know. I think we all could benefit from doing more on social media just because they're kind of micro podcasts where you can practice the craft. We've gotten to this weird place where, and maybe we can do an episode on this at some point, we've gotten to this weird place where a lot of people are just so focused on optimizing and repurposing that they're actually not getting that much better. Yes, you can do an episode and you can break it into 10 social media clips and you can do all that, sure. But you're not getting better at making short form content. You're relying on AI to do it for you, or whoever, your team, whoever it is. There's something to be said about being able to sit down and me saying, okay, give me a hook, story, lesson, future pace, call to action. You got to do all 5 of those, and I need you to do it in 60 seconds. Go. There's something about that, because that is a skill development, right? It's different. So maybe that's another piece of this too, is the personality part and just the development of skills part is going to come from other areas, not just the podcast, because an episode every week is just not that many reps, really, if you think about it. But if you were to do what I've suggested before, give me a minute on your Instagram story every day, that's 365 reps if you do that every day. So now you have 365 reps plus 52 reps from the podcast. That's 420-ish, something like that. That adds up. Now, you're also doing one guest episode every week. So that's 470-ish. Now you're doing 470 reps a year. Boom. Big difference between 52. Because what a lot of people will say is, well, I'm posting on social media every day. Sure, but it's repurposed stuff. It's not necessarily created. Now, this is ideal, maybe not realistic. I'm not saying you have to do it every day. But, I mean, very honestly, and sit with me on this, how hard is it to hold your phone up and just record a video? On a scale of 0 to 10. If right now it's 10 out of 10 hard, I would start with doing one of those a week and just work on it. Because the goal is to not edit these. They just go on your stories. If you say, it's probably like 6 out of 10, I would do 2 of these a week. If you say it's 4 out of 10, I would do 3 of these a week. If you say it's 2 out of 10, I would do 4 or 5 of these a week. And if you say this is 0 out of 10, it's super easy, do one every day. Because it will pay dividends. So there is something to be said about that. The prep we have to do because it's time bound. There's an interview, we do the prep. The personality, that's during the reps usually, but we don't necessarily have enough reps to really increase that. And then the perspective is after. But you can see that that's really set up for the podcast. So there's something to be said. How many times can I say that in one freaking episode? About the consistency of content that isn't repurposed. And that's a differentiator too, is the skill, the mastery. Maybe we'll add another P, so it would be 4 Ps, professionalism. That's different. Who do you think is going to be better? Somebody who does 1 episode a week and then also creates native content for social media, or somebody who does 1 episode a week and then repurposes all their content? I'm telling you, it's a reps game. And one of the best ways to get reps is stories, because they disappear. They disappear. Never to be seen again. So it literally is just a glimpse of you that day. And you can do this in any way. You can add it to another habit you already have, or however you choose to do it. But that there's something to that I don't think enough people are really focused on. They're focused on, this was a very important shift for me. And then I'll get out of here. We're going a little longer than expected. A very important shift for me was, I can't wait until we get there I want to make sure I'm ready when we get there. extremely different lives, extremely different habits, extremely different perspectives, extremely different mindsets. It was always, well, I can't wait to get there, whatever there is for you. All right, for me, it was 1 million listens and $1 million. If I can get to 1 million and 1 million, that would be everything. And then eventually it got to the point where I was like, I just want to make sure that I'm ready when I get there, and I'm talented when I get there, and I'm skilled when I get there, and I can actually retain the momentum. I don't want success, quote unquote. I want sustainable success. I want to make sure that I can actually maintain what I have. I want to make sure that I can grow into it. That was a completely different perspective for me. So it went from doing enough to be successful to doing enough to maintain success. And those were two very different conversations for me. So I share that with you just because maybe that's a perspective that you can take and do something with, right? All right, recap, prep. You are in total control of prep. Total. I am telling you, if you have ChatGPT write your questions, you're going to get left behind. I'm telling you, it's not a differentiator. Anybody can do it. And I know when the questions have been from ChatGPT. I can tell, right? So that's a shortcut. That is a supplement. That is not going to make you a great interviewer. I'm sorry, it's not. Personality. That is something AI cannot help you with. This is you. Personality. You're the person with a personality. Then we have perspective. That's like reflection and measuring data. And then I think the last one probably is professionalism. So it went from the 2 Ps to the 2 Ps plus the bonus ones. Professionalism is getting good at the craft of this. That is something that nothing can take away from you. Nothing can take that away from you. Because if we do look at some of the big shows, the Diary of a CEO types, the Andrew Huberman types, the Modern Wisdom types, they are good interviewers and they ask good questions and they do good research. Now, do they do it or does somebody on the team? That's a different conversation, but it's being done. Regardless of who's doing it, it's being done, but it's up to you to do it if you're a one-person show at this point, right? All right, cool. All right, if you're out there and you feel stuck with this, if you're out there and you're trying to figure out what is your differentiator, I will have my link below for a free 30-minute podcast breakthrough session, and you can always message me, Instagram, Facebook, email, whatever. We don't have to do a call. I'm happy to answer any questions you have, so feel free to shoot me a message on any of those platforms, email, whatever. And I hope that you're leaning into what makes you different. I hope you are, because the playing field has gotten very level in terms of accessibility, right? I just moved and I built a studio in a couple days. Now it's not done yet. I'm still working on some stuff and adding some stuff, but anybody can do this, right? If you know how to use a drill and you have access to however many hundreds of dollars, cool. You can do this. Boom, you're off to the races. Buy some lights. You don't have to have the camera. You don't have to have the everything that I have, right? But it's more accessible than it's ever been. So I hope for you, you're leaning into what makes you different, because what makes you different is probably also going to be what makes you memorable, as weird as that might sound. All right, cool. All right, until next week, keep on crushing it, keep on podcasting, and I will talk to you all then.